inviting me to be on with you all today. And it's great to have been introduced to all of your members that are on this call. To all of you, thank you for being in business. I think there's several of you that are in what I would consider to be small businesses, which is really the engine of our economy. And it's not for the timid and the faint of heart. Small business is a tough place to be, and everything's on the line for you every day. So thank you for what you do for the state of Nebraska and for the country in terms of keeping the economy moving. A little bit about Jim Smith. There are a couple of folks on the call to begin with, and I mentioned that I was a Floridian by birth, Nebraskan by choice, graduate of the University of Florida, have an MBA from Creighton University after I arrived in Nebraska. But after leaving college, I spent a number of years along the Gulf Coast in Louisiana and Texas working for electric and gas utilities in various management positions. After marrying my wife, Ruth, Public Power recruited me, came knocking on my door, and it just so happened we were able to come back to her hometown of Omaha, Nebraska, and I joined Omaha Public Power District. So I spent about half of my 25 years in electric and gas utilities in investor-owned utilities, those in which the shareholders are ultimately responsible for the decisions on those utilities. And then half of that career in public power, where the shareholders are the taxpayers and the citizens that are served by the utility. And it's kind of interesting. Of course, everyone knows George Norris from their civic lessons in Nebraska. George Norris is the father of public power. He was the father and author of the Tennessee Valley Authority. He brought the rural electrification to Nebraska and to the country. But he's also known for something else, and that is the unicameral system in Nebraska, right? We are the only state that has a single house in the legislature. And so I was fortunate to not only participate in the first of George Norris's grand experiments of public power, but also a second one, which was the unicameral system. So I was a state senator representing the middle part of Sarpy County for 8 years, where I chaired the Transportation Telecommunications Committee, and I also chaired the Revenue Committee. And then probably one thing that I enjoyed the most, received the most satisfaction of, was being a small business owner myself. So almost 2 years ago, we sold our second generation company, Norm Store Service, to a corporation out of Kansas City. And those of you who have been around a while, you know of Norm Store Service, a 56-year-old business, and doors, docks, and gates. And we did everything from small garage doors up to managing the doors and the hangar systems at Offutt Air Force Base. So we were a contractor for Offutt under a number of contracts. But anyway, that's kind of the span of my background, my education, and also my experience. And in my last year of the legislature in 2018, I was tapped to head up and help to build the Blueprint Nebraska plan for economic growth and prosperity. And a little bit about Blueprint Nebraska. I imagine probably most of you have sat in on one of my presentations over the last couple of years. But, these types of plans, exist around the country. Usually they're take on the shape of maybe being a joint effort between higher education and government. Sometimes it's a new governor coming into office and they want to build their own economic plan. What's unique about Blueprint Nebraska is that it's purely private sector driven. So Lance Fritz and Owen Palm are my two co-chairs. Lance Fritz, of course, is the CEO of Union Pacific Railroad, and Owen Palm is CEO of 21st Century Holdings, which is a number of John Deere dealerships across the state, and he's based in Scotts Bluff. And Blueprint Nebraska was intended to be a statewide effort to where it could not be confused with being all about Omaha area or Lincoln area or the populated areas of the state, but rather an economic plan that resonates with all citizens and all businesses across the state. And so I'm going to share my screen here and give you a little bit of background on the where we are today. And so these are the 15 signature initiatives that you may have heard about to date. If you want to go into more detail on the Blueprint Nebraska plan, you can find the plan in its entirety. You can download the report from blueprint-nebraska.org, blueprint-nebraska.org. And I also gave you my email address that if any of you want to follow up with me after this meeting, if you want any of this information, copies of the slide presentation, or for me to speak to any of your other groups, happy to do so. Just contact me at that email that I sent to you in the chat. But the 15 signature initiatives were really grouped into 4 areas of growth for the state around focusing on people, focusing on our places, focusing on our government, and then the potential high growth sectors. And when I say potential high growth sectors, we know that we're really good in government, unfortunately. We're really good in agriculture and in manufacturing and in banking. But what we're really lacking is introducing more innovation and technology into those core areas or core business sectors for the state. So what we're advocating for in the sector side of this is greater R&D, greater investment in technology, adoption of more technology around our core industries, because that's how we're going to produce naturally higher wages in these sectors. But what we're proposing around people, places, and government will naturally help to grow those sectors that we're talking about. But today, I wanted to speak a little bit more detailed on realigning Nebraska's tax strategy and what Blueprint Nebraska is up to right now. In the next several weeks, you're going to hear a little bit more about how Blueprint Nebraska plans to transition in 2021 and beyond to make certain we are able to implement and have great success in implementing around these timeless, ageless initiatives. So with Nebraska's tax strategy, we know that here, I've highlighted in blue a few of the key points: that modest economic growth, outmigration of our educated workforce, and our higher taxes burden our businesses and our residents. I don't think there's any question about that. It's going to be a question about how do we address it. Our tax code in Nebraska is a product of the 20th century. It really hasn't been updated since the mid-60s. So it is reflective of an economy that existed in the mid-60s, not the economy of today and the economy of what we want to become tomorrow. Our business environment and economic growth prospects are in the lower half of the states. Now, that's not to say that Nebraska doesn't rank well in our fiscal stability. We rank very high there. We're very good at controlling spending, and I applaud Governor Ricketts for doing that. But we do not have a tax structure that works with those other 14 initiatives to promote strong economic prospects among our competitor states. We know that taxes play an important role in location, and states that are losing people, that means a lot of money to them. Of course, it's not always about taxes that states lose population, but generally it plays a major factor in it. You look at New York, you look at California, people are leaving those states by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. And they're going somewhere. And if they're going somewhere to build their businesses and build their careers and build their lives, they're looking for states that promote their values. And usually, again, tax revenue, tax policy is a part of their decision. So here's a little bit of a comparison. And for those of you that are not seeing my screen, I know a number of folks are just joining by phone. I'll try to describe what the slide is showing you. But in the Blueprint Nebraska study, we have a number of peer states that we make our comparisons to. We know we're competing with states across the country, but most directly, we're competing with states that border us or close by in the Midwest. And when it comes to taxes, I think it's fair to understand how we stack up against our peer states. And our peer states are Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Missouri. So when we look at individual income tax, I'm using a tax foundation study that we rank number 21. That means there are 20 states that rank better than us in terms of individual income tax policy. Now, how do these neighboring states stack up? Overall, Nebraska is near the bottom of that, with the exception of probably Minnesota. They all tax income differently, or individual income differently. But the one thing that stands out with Nebraska is the level of progressivity in the individual income tax structure. So Nebraska ranks very high in progressivity. What that basically means, if you look at the difference between average tax liability, in our case, we're comparing per $1,000 at incomes of $50,000 and then at $150,000. That people get into that high tax bracket very, very quickly. In fact, for the top individual tax bracket in Nebraska, they get into that at $31,000 a year. That's not a high wage. That's not a high income. And as we're wanting to promote naturally higher incomes, if we're wanting to attract 18 to 34-year-old population, if we're wanting our STEM graduates to remain in Nebraska, and we want to develop STEM-related jobs in Nebraska, all of that is going to involve higher wages for that 18 to 34-year-old group. They're not going to want to get into the highest tax bracket at $31,000 a year. So Nebraska's effective income tax rate for the top decile is nearly triple that of the bottom 7 deciles. And the top 10% of income earners pay more than half of Nebraska's individual income taxes. Now, this is not even to get into the pass-through businesses. Most of our small businesses pay their income taxes through the individual income tax structure, not through the corporate tax structure. So a lot of small businesses are caught up in this as well. So we have to make it more friendly and competitive with our neighboring states. Corporate income taxes are high relative to the same number of peer states. And we tend to mask our high corporate income tax rates with business incentives. We rely on those business incentives. And why do we rely on them? Because our corporate income tax structure, corporate income tax rates are so high. So we're not necessarily advocating to eliminate the corporate income tax rate, but certainly to make it more competitive with our neighboring states, to where we do not have to rely on those business incentives. And then everyone's favorite, oh, and by the way, those that are not seeing the presentation, the Tax Foundation ranks Nebraska number 32 in corporate income tax policy. And relative to our neighboring utilities, you can look at this chart, you can see that we are not competitive with our neighboring states when it comes to corporate income taxes. Property taxes is the far worst of them all. We rank number 41 in this one, meaning that there's 40 states that have less burdensome property taxes than Nebraska. If you look at good tax policy, however, people are not going to move their businesses to Nebraska. They're not going to come to Nebraska because we lower property taxes. But it does play an important role for the businesses and the people that are here. So I don't think there's any more to be said. Property tax is always at the forefront of everyone's mind, and it plays a role, but we have to address the corporate and individual income taxes. And then there's sales and use tax. And this is where you can see how old and out of date our tax code is. We rank pretty well. We look competitive when it comes to sales and use tax, but probably something like $3 or $4 out of every $5 of goods and services are not taxed in our state. And in the one of these charts, you will see that over the decades, going back to 1929 to current, services continue to increase as a percentage of the economy, whereas goods continues to decline as a percentage of the economy. And we exempt a lot of the services, if not all of the services. So with services becoming a larger portion of our economy, it's off the table on taxation, a lot of exemptions there. We're leaving that money on the table, and we're instead taxing people's income. So sales and use tax is the more favorable places to tax if from traditional economic and tax policy theory. And then Nebraska's sales tax base has declined by nearly half since 1970. There's another chart here that shows from 1970 to current that sales tax base continues to decline. So when you hear people talking about broadening the sales tax base, what we're talking about is removing those exemptions on sales tax and using those revenues, which create less of a drag on the economy, and using those revenues to reduce taxes that do create a drag on the economy, like corporate income tax, like individual income tax, and then certainly using some of that as well with property tax. And I'm going to run way back down to the bottom here. And this chart shows you, these are a number of options that we're looking at. This is an example. Sales tax based broadening options. You can see that these are types of services and goods that are not taxed, and various scenarios here show how much money is in them. So for example, I'll give you one: storage and moving services. There's $9.7 million that is exempted there. Legal services at the very bottom, $21 million. Now people start getting a little worried about, so are you saying you're going to increase taxes on all of these? No, we're not. But what we're saying is we need to do a thorough study as to which of these are the most elastic, that is, creates the greatest drag on the economy, and address and make certain that we do not do damage to our economy, to our competitive standing with our peer states. But let's look at those that do not have much of elasticity to where we can actually remove some of those exemptions, take that revenue, and buy down some of the other more troubling types of revenue. So what are we planning to do? We're looking to strategically reduce the tax burden in our tax modernization framework, simplify income taxes to stimulate growth, and then also to modernize and expand the sales tax base, but do it in such a way that provides the net effect of strengthening our economy, growing our economy, and allowing our businesses to be more competitive. So in the month of June, we're going to release a bold tax modernization framework. We do not expect it to be the ultimate plan that goes to the legislature in 2022. And we do not expect it to be the initial plan in which all the chambers of commerce embrace, because it will be controversial. It will remove some of the exemptions on businesses, that are benefiting from those exemptions today. But what we're trying to do is build the groundwork for what it's going to take to modernize our tax system. Then over the course of the summer and into the fall, the Chambers of Commerce, of course, will be working with us, and we will continue to modify what that plan looks like so that by the time it gets to the legislature, Senator Linehan and her committee take it up, that there will be more alignment around what the ideal plan is. But it has to be bold if we are to move the needle in being competitive with our peer states. So I know I ran through a lot of stuff very, very quickly, but maybe I can just take some Q&As and we can just have a conversation.
Very good. Thanks, Jim. Excuse me. Very interesting information and interesting comparisons. I will start with a couple of questions or observations. So I worked for an organization a while back who was seriously considering moving their headquarters to South Dakota because of the tax advantages of South Dakota. How is it, or what are the trade-offs, I guess, if you know? So where if South Dakota has such a lenient tax structure, where does South Dakota get their revenue to operate the state in comparison to us? And I'll add a caveat to that, right? We have incredible public school system throughout our state. However, South Dakota ranks very close to the bottom in regard to teacher salaries, et cetera. Is that one of the trade-offs necessarily between us and them at this point, or not?
I don't think so. And remember, having served in the legislature for 8 years, we can come up with perfect, ideal strategy. The business minds, like those of you on the call today, we can come up with great strategy. But by the time the politicians get to it and have to come up with a grand compromise, you sometimes have less than ideal outcomes. With that said, South Dakota is a state that has been able to take a large step towards the right modernization strategy. And people like to bring up Kansas, and I want to just address kind of that elephant in the room, if you would. Kansas, you know, a lot of folks will like to say that Kansas is an example of what not to do, that is a failed policy for reducing income taxes. I like to talk about it in terms of the tale of two states. We have South Dakota to our north, Kansas to our south. Both of those states undertook strategies to eliminate or significantly reduce their income taxes. What happened in South Dakota is you had two branches of government. You had the executive branch and the legislative branch working together to control spending and reduce the tax burden. And the outcome was relatively successful. And I'll get to education here in a moment. But if you go to Kansas, in that state, you had the executive and the legislative branches working against each other. You had Brownback that wanted to reduce the tax burden, and you had the legislature that wanted to put the pedal down on spending and increase spending. And when you increase spending, you're not going to be able to secure those the reduction in taxes that you would otherwise like to see happen. And so they had to go back and they had to fill those gaps with increases in taxes. So Nebraska, we're somewhere nicely in the middle. We have Governor Ricketts, that I had a chance of working with for a number of years in the legislature. The one thing he has done a good job at is controlling the growth of spending, the growth of government. And so that puts us in a really good position to now be able to address the restructuring of the tax code and the modernization with, so we already have spending under control. We can go modernize the tax structure and not get things out of whack. When it comes to education, in Nebraska, Remember, education is primarily funded through local dollars, property tax dollars. In fact, if you look at some of our scorecards, you'll see that Nebraska ranks way at the bottom in terms of state aid to education. And people think, well, that means that Nebraska doesn't spend very much on education. That's not true. We rank in the upper half of states in terms of spending per pupil. However, we tend to fund that with local tax dollars and not through general fund dollars, which are your income taxes and your sales tax dollars. So you have to look a little deeper when you go into these different states and seeing how they're spending and what all that means. South Dakota, they removed all their exemptions, so there's probably some controversial sales taxes. I mean, when you look at businesses, it's bad policy to tax. It's bad policy to tax business inputs because it creates kind of this pyramiding. You put a tax on top of a tax. South Dakota was not so concerned about that. Their primary concern was eliminating that income taxes. Again, no system is perfect, but what you ultimately want to do is come up with a tax structure that moves you towards being more competitive, not one that creates less competitiveness.
Well, and we certainly know the impact of our current business and corporate taxes can be a diversion to employers and businesses seeking to locate here in the state. One other point, Jim, and then I will turn the floor over to everybody else. I apologize, feel like I'm monopolizing here, but I'm in complete agreement that we've got to propose something bold, because from something bold, then hopefully we whittle down to something that's a decent compromise. But I heard a statistic not long ago that, and you can correct me, I don't know that I have it completely accurate, but was it like 1963 or something, the last time Nebraska's tax code was revised? And then, and to that, with that said, right, our whole economy and business environment has changed drastically since then.
You're absolutely right. It was 1967. And, we like to say that the tax code that we have today was designed for the economy of 1967, where goods outpaced services in terms of a portion of the economy. And you did not have the increase in automation and innovation. And so now we're presented with, okay, we would like to at least get the tax code reflecting what our current economy is, more of a services-driven economy. But we also need to design in such a way that it complements the strategy of where we want to be in the next 20 years. And that takes us back to those 14 signature initiatives. We need to have greater research and development. We need to have more investment in R&D. We are lagging behind our peer states in that arena. We know that STEM-related job growth is critical in order to have us competitive in manufacturing, have us competitive in value-added ag services, have us competitive in fintech or finance tech, insure tech, banking type of technology. And we don't have the type of tax structure today that encourages investment in the technology, in the innovation. So we have to change that. If we want to attract 18 to 34-year-olds, we probably need to have some incentives in our tax code that helps with childcare, probably first home purchases, and tuition forgiveness. Now, can we do that without giveaways? Absolutely. We can make it very targeted, but that's the type of thing that we need to be looking at in our tax code to promote the economy of the future.
Hey, Jim, this is Todd Smith. How are you?
Great.
Good. I'm the CEO of Symphony Workforce, and I just want to tag on and pivot this conversation just a little bit because I want to pick your brain. In one of your slides, it shows that Blueprint is really focused on people. And we all know as business owners that somewhere between a fourth of your budget to a third of your budget is spent on human capital. And you just mentioned the ability to recruit 18 to 34-year-olds. Help us understand, what is Blueprint Nebraska doing specifically to engage the youth of Nebraska, right? So now we're talking about harvesting our own talent, from 13 years old so that we can keep them at 18, right? And the ability to recruit externally from other states around us to Nebraska. So they're coming to us for college, they're coming to us post-college, they're coming to us at 27, 28 years old. What are we doing systematically and at scale to bring that talent that also helps our tax base?
Right. So when you look at the blueprint study, you will see some suggestions as to what we can be doing and need to be doing. It is far from a comprehensive set of action items to address the people issue. But I think it's one of those things where it gets everyone to start thinking that we do need to be attractive to the 18 to 34-year-old population. And what is the image of Nebraska to the 18 to 34-year-olds? When we were putting our plan together and we were traveling the state, and we were talking to high schoolers that were near graduation, 11th or 12th grade, they did not have the most favorable opinion of Nebraska, especially a lot of these kids coming from the populated centers of Western Nebraska. You know, they were of the impression that agriculture was all about production. It was about farming, ranching. And they did not see themselves on a farm or on a ranch. And how do they, what is there going to be in their community to keep them there? And so we start talking about that, agriculture is a base on which you can build any career. That you can have, if you want to be in the sciences, you can be in sciences around agriculture. You can be in business around agriculture. There's lots of value-added services are benefiting from our efficient production rates, but those services are benefiting on the outside of our borders. So our product moves out of our state and people build careers and great businesses on our production, but that doesn't help our young people and that doesn't help our communities to thrive. So our communities have to be vibrant. So you think about even the basic things that we enjoy being in the Omaha metro area. We have access to entertainment, we have access to the arts, and many of the communities do not. So we're not going to be able to get that in every small community, but certainly the larger populated centers of Western Nebraska need to have access to attract talent. And they also need to have access to early childhood care, elderly care. A lot of these younger families that, are in greater Nebraska today are moving to a populated center because they need to have elderly care. And so some of these places don't have some of the basic services of healthcare and elderly care, in addition to the early childhood. We have an education system today which has been stressed with COVID, but it's revealed some things, and that is that there are ways to deliver great education in non-traditional ways. So internships and apprenticeships, customized workforce solutions around manufacturing and agriculture, but also we call it a Choose Nebraska campaign. When we have a tourism campaign that says Nebraska is not for everyone, that's not, I know it gets a lot of clicks, it gets a lot of laughs on late night TV, but it doesn't encourage our young people that are here today that Nebraska is a great place for them to be. And it probably doesn't help those that are looking to further their careers. They're probably not looking to Nebraska as an option. So changing our image, having a very aggressive Choose Nebraska campaign. That's one of the areas that we're working on right now with DED and the State Chamber of Commerce. But also, diversity and inclusivity. We are a welcoming state. That is the nature of Nebraska, but we have to make certain that we give every appearance to being welcoming to a diverse population. So I know I didn't give you specifics there. If you go to report, you can get into it a little bit more. What Blueprint Nebraska is trying to do is help to drive the narrative, drive the discussion we need to have as to where our focus needs to be as a state. And then we're working with other organizations to help build out some of these initiatives.
This is Dick Lerner. I have just a couple of items here. First of all, with the gambling that was passed and what's going to be coming in the Omaha, Lincoln area with new casinos and the revenue that's going to be generated. And then also the development of the grasslands, wind power for biodiesel and anything else. These are all potential assets that could be used against property taxes and income taxes in the state. Has that been factored in the future tax planning?
No. You'll see references to places that we do make reference to building upon our position that Nebraska is in today with its environment, with its resources. So wind generation, renewable energy can provide direct property tax relief. Even, I mean, regardless of what the type of energy is, with the Trans-Canada pipeline was going to provide significant property tax relief for the counties in which that pipeline followed. But there are opportunities, as you mentioned, to offset property taxes.
These will be game changers, once they're factored in here, because it's going to shift a lot of that taxation from individuals and corporations to revenues that are future going to be coming into the state, which will be attractive to companies and to individuals alike. And I think the sooner that happens, we're late in getting there in the state right now, got a lot of catch up to do. And what I have in the last 27 years is worked with a lot of the military that are transitioning out of the military back to civilian. The state has done a good job with military benefits as far as taxation on their income. But what is attractive, not only for a young person, but somebody coming out of the military, is what the property taxes are going to be, what their income taxes are going to be. And if we can get to a state like what Nevada does with their taxation because of the revenues coming up from the casinos, that will be a game changer here in the center part of the country.
All right.
Hi, Jim. John Batcher here. Had a question. As you've really put together a comprehensive, high-level proposal here, and obviously you're working to hang more and more on this framework, which is wonderful. As you look at the portion that you talked about, out-migration of Nebraska's youth or the talent, do we know what that cost is, not only in the near term, but long term from a tax perspective? Have we been able to estimate that in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, unfortunately, there have not been enough econometric style modeling efforts to quantify what those numbers are, because with the legislature today, the revenue modeling is pretty static. It's not dynamic. It doesn't take into effect the interplay between, increases and decreases in different types of population or industries. All I can say is that it's really twofold. It's a huge number for revenue taken off the table that Nebraska will no longer have the potential to receive. But it also has a longer term effect of the next number of generations. So as we lose that 18 to 34-year-old population, we're losing the lifeblood of the state, and someone's benefiting from attracting those young people. And it's not just a Florida or in Arizona. There are other Midwestern states that are attracting them because of the opportunities that include some degree of innovation and technology. And that's what's really attractive to many of that 18 to 34-year-old population. You don't have to have a 4-year degree or even a 2-year degree to participate in some of that, the jobs of tomorrow. But they're being attracted by other states that are offering those things and are also offering the various amenities for that young population. Again, amenities that the Omaha metro area enjoys, but perhaps Kearney, Grand Island, Hastings may not.
Who else? Any other questions or comments? This is a lot to think about.
I know it's like drinking from a fire hose, but I'd like to go back to just to one thing, and I guess with the Blueprint Nebraska plan that was so powerful, in that you had 21 business leaders from across the state that came together and agreed on these 15 signature initiatives, that these together can be a game changer for Nebraska's economy. And so I think that was very important. And again, you always stand to have greater success when you have businesses lead the initiative, lead the effort, as opposed to leaving it to higher education or leaving it to government. So I'd like to leave on that note. If you run into any of those leaders, thank them for what they've done. They leaned in very heavily on this, and we expect to continue to make this part of the discussion for growth over the next 2-3 years.
Jim, to that point of the 21 business leaders coming together, was that at the very inception of this, was that driven by the governor? Was that driven by the Nebraska Chamber? What did that look like? How did this even come to fruition?
Very good. You remember Hank Bounds, who was the president of the University of Nebraska system. He had come to Nebraska during the time that I was a legislator. And I remember Hank and I having numerous conversations about a similar effort that he worked on with then Governor Haley Barbour of Mississippi. This was when Hank was at higher education in Mississippi. So Hank and Haley Barbour had combined government and higher education to build Blueprint Mississippi. But it was not business driven. It was, again, government education driven. And so he was looking to do something similar in Nebraska. And he and the governor had that conversation. You know, the governor did not want it to be government driven. He didn't want it to be education driven. So the two of them, I like to call them our co-founders, Hank and Governor Ricketts. They agreed that they would turn this over to the private sector. And so they recruited Lance Fritz and Owen Palm, and they said, hey, we want to turn this over to you, and we want you to make this a private sector driven effort. And so Hank, and then Hank and the governor, who stayed on as advisors, but they stepped aside from the leadership of the effort. And Lance Fritz and Owen, they hand selected another 19 members of the steering committee to work with them. And so that's how it came to be.
Very good. Thank you for that. Ken, did you have a comment?
I did. Just a quick question, Jim. I think I've talked to you a few times, but can you review a little bit about, I see the bullet as far as build an additional 30 to 50,000 achievable living housing units. Can you kind of give a quick overview as far as where you see that falling within the state itself? Because I represent, from a habitat perspective, Sarpy County, but, also interest with Omaha, and then for sure Washington County is, they bring in Dollar General, and they have kind of a housing shortage up in Blair as well. But kind of talk about workforce housing and kind of what you see on the forefront as far as what's next. Thanks.
Yeah, so we all know that, housing is where jobs sleep, and every one of our communities has a housing issue, but it's a little different from community to community. In some places, it's a diversity of the housing, and in other places, it's the affordability of the housing, and sometimes it's just, quite frankly, there's just no available housing. And we have to have the right type of incentives at the local level as well as the state level to address this, to be able to support the construction of the type of housing that's needed. So all of these things, I mean, it's hard, we know that there's housing needs right now. Affordable housing is critical to an underserved portion of our population. But no one wants to build the speculative housing if there's a question as to whether there will be a market. And then no one wants to recruit into their communities if they know they don't have the housing to satisfy the needs. So it's like there's a number of these that have to be addressed simultaneously. They have to advance forward. And so with building an additional 30 to 50,000 achievable livable housing units, I think one of the good models on this is what's going on through the Exarban Foundation in the Norfolk area, and how they are actually consolidating livable, workable spaces. So some of our towns in what I'd consider to be rural Nebraska populated centers, they began to sprawl over years because there was some level of growth in population. And then as they have lost population, they have these sprawling areas that are not conducive to the businesses, interaction between businesses and families. And so Norfolk is working to help to build a community within a community, more of a consolidated living, livable, workable area that's attractive to that 18 to 34-year-old population. That's one of the solutions, how to, kind of reinventing, if you would, some of these communities, but also to work with some of the charitable organizations to make certain we have affordable housing.
Thanks, Jim.
Super. Jim, thank you so much. Again, there is so much to think about. There are so many interdependent issues. Like you said, you've got to be addressing both sides of the coin at the same time on so many of these. I appreciate you taking the time. If you've got just a couple of minutes, I'm hoping after we complete here, whether you could stay on for just a minute or two, and John and Todd as well, and have just a brief conversation following the presentation here. But as always, I appreciate those of you who have taken the time on a Friday morning to join in and learn a little bit what's happening, again, what impacts certainly our community and your businesses, but the state as a whole. As always, looking forward to seeing you on future Coffee with Kevin's. Next week, we have the Bellevue Little Theater coming on, telling us about their history, their progression, and their latest performance, if you will, that's coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So we'll be excited to have a local nonprofit and local arts and entertainment, Jim. here in Bellevue. So thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Hopefully we'll see you next week. And again, if you've just got a minute, and John and Todd, if you can stay on, that would be great. Take care, everybody.
Bye.